Hello and welcome back to Chess Tactic Today, your home for brilliant chess. We've got an absolute firecracker of a game for you, as the Grandmaster Etienne Bacrot takes on the young world chess champion Gukesh in FIDE Grand Swiss round. This is a battle of generations and a clash of styles that promises tactical fireworks from the very first move. And we're off. Bacrot opens with the classic king's pawn to king 4, immediately staking a claim in the center. Gukesh responds with pawn to queen's bishop 3, the Caro-Kann Advance. This is a super solid and reliable opening, aiming for a strong pawn structure. White plays pawn to queen 4, building that ideal central pawn duo. This is the most principled way to challenge black. And black immediately strikes back with pawn to queen 4. Gukesh says, "I'm not letting you have the center for free." Bacrot chooses the advance variation, pawn to king 5. He's closing the center and creating a space advantage, but this pawn can become a target later. A key idea for black in the Caro-Kann. Bishop to king's bishop 4. Gukesh gets his bad bishop outside the pawn chain before he locks it in. Knight to king's bishop 3 for white. A natural developing move, controlling the center and preparing to castle. Black plays pawn to king 3. This solidifies the center and prepares to develop the kingside pieces. Bishop to king 2. A simple, solid, developing move from Bacrot, getting his own bishop into the game. Knight to king 2 from Gukesh. A flexible square for the knight, which can support the center or head to g6. Bacrot castles kingside. King safety first, connecting the rooks and getting the king out of the center. Pawn to king's rook 3. A useful little move from Gukesh, creating an escape square for his bishop if it gets attacked. Knight to queen's bishop 2. Bacrot continues his development, bringing another piece into the fight. And Gukesh mirrors him with knight to queen 2. Both sides are maneuvering their pieces, getting ready for the middle game. Knight to queen's knight 3. White's knight finds an active post, eyeing squares on the queen side. Here we go! Pawn to king's knight 4. Gukesh shows his aggressive intentions, starting a pawn storm on the king side to challenge white's control. And Bacrot responds on the other side of the board. Pawn to queen's rook 4, looking to create his own play on the queen side. Bishop to king's knight 2. The bishop tucks itself away onto a powerful diagonal, ready to slice across the board. Rook to king 1. A subtle but strong move, preparing to support the e5 pawn and adding flexibility to white's position. Gukesh castles kingside. It might look a bit risky castling into his own pawn storm, but he trusts his defensive setup. Pawn to king's rook 3. Bacrot prevents black's knight from hopping into g4, a very sensible precaution. Pawn to queen's knight 3. Gukesh prepares to challenge white's queenside expansion with his own pawn break. Bishop to king 3. A nice centralizing move, improving the bishop and connecting the rooks. Rook to queen's bishop 1. The rook moves to the c-file, where it's likely the action will happen. Pawn to queen's rook 5. Bacrot keeps pushing on the queen side, trying to create a weakness in black's camp. And there's the break! Pawn to queen's bishop 4. Gukesh strikes at the heart of white's pawn structure, opening up the position. Bishop to queen's rook 6. A very annoying pin. This move puts pressure on the c8 rook and complicates black's plans. Rook to queen's bishop 2. Gukesh calmly sidesteps the pin and keeps his rook active on the c-file. Pawn takes pawn on queen's knight 6. The tension is released, and we have our first capture of the game. Pawn takes pawn on queen's rook 6. Black recaptures, opening the a-file for his rook. Pawn to queen's bishop 3. A solid move, reinforcing white's center and restricting black's pieces. Pawn takes pawn on queen 4. Gukesh opens the c-file completely, creating a highway for his rooks. Knight takes pawn on queen 4. Bacrot recaptures, and his knight lands on a beautiful central square. Bishop to king 4. A clever move by Gukesh, challenging white's central knight. Knight to queen 2. Bacrot decides to reroute his other knight to deal with the pesky bishop. Bishop to king's knight 3. The bishop retreats but keeps an eye on the long diagonal. Knight to queen's bishop 5. An aggressive jump, putting pressure on black's rook on c7. Rook to queen's bishop 3. Gukesh moves his rook out of danger and eyes the weak pawn on c3. Knight to queen 4. The knight returns to the center. It seems Bacrot is happy with a repetition here. Rook to queen's bishop 4. But Gukesh says, "No thank you, to the draw." He improves his rook's position. Knight to king's bishop 3. Bacrot regroups, bringing his knight back to a more defensive role. Rook to queen's rook 4. A fantastic maneuver. The rook swings over to the a-file to cause problems. Bishop to queen 4. White centralizes the bishop, a very logical move. Queen to queen's bishop 2. Gukesh connects his rooks and prepares to challenge for the open a-file. Queen to king 2. Bacrot develops his queen and keeps an eye on the whole board. Rook takes rook on queen's rook 8. A trade of rooks, simplifying the position slightly. Rook takes rook on queen's rook 8. White recaptures and now controls the only open file. Rook to queen's rook 1. Gukesh immediately challenges that control. He will not give up the a-file without a fight. Rook to king 1. A bit of a surprising retreat. Bacrot cedes the a-file to black. Knight to queen's bishop 4. The knight hops into a fantastic outpost, putting pressure on white's position. Bishop to queen's knight 5. Bacrot moves his bishop, but this allows black's rook to get very active. Rook to queen's rook 7. The rook invades deep into white's territory, and suddenly Bacrot has a real problem to solve. Knight to king's bishop 1. A passive defensive move. Bacrot is trying to hold everything together. Bishop to king 4. The bishop returns to this excellent square, restricting white's knights. Knight to king's knight 3. Bacrot tries to create some counterplay by bringing his knight towards the king side. Knight to king's knight 3. And Gukesh does the same. His knight is heading for the attack. Knight to king's rook 5. An aggressive lunge from Bacrot, but it might be too optimistic. Bishop to king's rook 1. A brilliant, quiet move. Gukesh tucks his bishop away from danger, preparing for the coming storm. Knight to queen 2. Bacrot is desperately trying to untangle his pieces. And there it is. Gukesh uncorks a thunderbolt with rook takes pawn on queen's knight 2. This is an absolutely stunning sacrifice, ripping open the protection around white's position. He's giving up a full rook just to get his pieces into the attack. What incredible courage from the young star. Rook to queen's rook 1. Bacrot tries to create a counter-threat against the black queen, but the initiative is firmly with Gukesh. Queen to queen's bishop 1. A calm and precise move, stepping out of the way of the rook and preparing for the next phase of the attack. Pawn to queen's bishop 4. Bacrot pushes his pawn, hoping to create some breathing room, but it's a desperate attempt. Wow, another sacrifice. Gukesh plays rook takes knight on queen 2. This isn't about material anymore. It's about pure chaos. By removing this key defender, he's preparing to unleash his own knight with a devastating fork. Bacrot is under immense pressure now. Queen takes rook on queen 2. White has no choice but to recapture. And here's the follow-up! Knight to queen's knight 6. A beautiful fork, attacking the queen on d2 and the rook on a 1. Gukesh will win back some material. Queen to king 3. The queen moves, but now the rook on a 1 is lost. Knight takes bishop on queen 4. Gukesh opts to capture the strong bishop instead of the rook. A fascinating choice, keeping the attack going. Queen takes knight on queen 4. White recaptures, but black's attack is far from over. Bishop takes pawn on king 5. The attack continues. Black's pieces are swarming the white king. Queen to queen 1. A defensive move, trying to guard the back rank. Pawn takes pawn on queen's bishop 5. And now Gukesh has a passed pawn. This is becoming a nightmare for white. Rook to queen's rook 4. The rook tries to get back into the game, but it might be too little too late. Bishop to queen 4. A fantastic blockading move, stopping the white rook and preparing to push the c-pawn. Queen to king 2. Bacrot is trying to find a way to stop the bleeding. And the pawn marches on. Pawn to queen's bishop 6. This little pawn is no longer just a nuisance. It's a ticking time bomb. It constricts white's pieces and is just 2 steps away from becoming a queen. Every move Bacrot makes now has to be with this pawn in mind. Bishop to queen 3. The bishop tries to get in the way of the pawn. Queen to queen's bishop 2. Gukesh improves his queen, adding more pressure and supporting the advance of his passed pawn. Bishop to queen's bishop 2. A final, desperate attempt to blockade the pawn. Bishop to king's rook 7. Check. A nice little check to force the king onto a less favorable square. King to king's bishop 1. The king is forced to move. Bishop to king 5. The bishop returns to its dominant post, eyeing the weak white king. King to king's knight 1. Bacrot moves his king again, trying to find safety, but there is none. King to king's bishop 1. A clever move by Gukesh, improving his king's position and preparing for the final assault. Queen to queen 3. Bacrot brings his queen out, but it's walking into a storm. Knight to king's rook 4. The final piece joins the attack. The threats against the white king are now overwhelming. Pawn to king's bishop 3. A move born of desperation, trying to block the bishop's diagonal, but it weakens the king even more. Queen to queen's bishop 4. Check. A perfectly timed check, driving the king into the open. King to king's bishop 1. The king is forced back. And that's the final blow. Knight to king's knight 4. Gukesh puts the knight on a killer square and Bacrot resigns. Why? The threats are just too much. The queen is threatened, mate is coming on g2, and the white king has absolutely nowhere to run. A brilliant and decisive final move to cap off a tactical masterpiece. What an incredible display of attacking chess from Gukesh. He showed immense bravery with those sacrifices and calculated the complex variations to perfection. Thanks so much for joining us on Chess Tactic today, and we'll see you for the next brilliant game.